What's up, Trekkies? Welcome back to the channel. This is my review of Enterprise's first season episode, Shuttlepod 1. In this episode, while investigating an asteroid field, Tucker and Reed discover what they believe to be the wreckage of the Enterprise. Convinced their ship has been destroyed and with the likelihood of their rescue slim to none, the two struggle to come to terms with their own impending deaths. This episode is very close to my heart. It's an episode that myself and a good friend of mine, we both almost always watch whenever we get together. It's an episode that encapsulates our friendship. We're both very much like Trip and Malcolm. Don't know if that's a good thing or not. Chris is my convention buddy. We go to the UK Star Trek conventions as often as we can and as often as we can honestly be bothered. The conventions here in the UK are not very good. It was a couple of years ago. We were going to the Star Trek Destination Convention, which was being held in Birmingham. We signed up for one of the packages. It was either a lieutenant or a commander package. It doesn't really matter. In that package was this script reading being done by Connor Trinneer and Dom Keating. So naturally, Chris and I were like, well, they're going to do a script reading of Shuttlepod 1, right? Considering the fact it's the episode that is so heavily focused around them. It makes sense. Does it make sense to you? It made sense to me at the time. We get there and we get our goodie bags. I don't know why they call them goodie bags. And we found out the episode that the two were going to be doing this reading of. It wasn't Shuttlepod 1. No, it was Amok Time, the second season premiere episode of the original series. Okay. I honestly and quite naively thought that there had been just some sort of terrible mix-up. And I went to the counter and in my best Karen Light impression, calmly but firmly prodded them that we have perhaps been given the wrong scripts and there's been some sort of terrible misunderstanding. No, that's the episode that they're doing the script reading for. It was a car crash. It was basically just them reading bits of the script out for about half an hour and mostly laughing. Everybody in the room was kind of laughing. I was laughing, but I was doing that laughing that, you know, when you're just not that actually thrilled about what's going on, but you just need to laugh because you don't want to be that guy, right? I didn't want to be that guy. We got a copy of the script, so naturally I had to do something that all good, normal Star Trek fans do. I got Don Keating to sign the script, making it out to Stinky. Of all of the memorabilia that I have, all of the trinkets and weird things, this remains my favourite. My signed copy of Amok Time, signed by Dominic Keating, made out to Stinky. One day, hopefully, maybe it might make me rich. Who knows? Anyway, let's talk about this episode because that's why you're here. Let's get into the things that I liked about this episode. And first off, the first thing here, obviously, goes without saying, are the performances of Dominic Keating and Connor Trinneer. Their performances are great and the two have really good chemistry together. These two are given some great material and they make the most of having the spotlight shone so brightly on them. And I'm trying to think if the two characters actually had much interaction with each other before this episode. I know the two had bits here and there, and there's this bit in Broken Bow where Reed does a pretty good disparaging impression. Keep your shirt down, Lieutenant. That's terrible. So I always thought, and probably rightfully so, that these two weren't particularly the best of friends. They had a good professional relationship, but that's pretty much where it ended. It kind of reminds me of the D Space Nine episode, I think it's called Rivals. It's the episode where Bashir and O'Brien, who don't get on, they're playing the racquetball. Is it racquetball? Let's just call it racquetball. And by the end of the episode, they're good friends and they would ultimately become one of the staple friendships of that show. Every Star Trek show has that staple friendship, right? TNG had Geordi and Data. Deep Space Nine had Bashir and O'Brien. Voyager had Paris and Kim. And Enterprise, after this episode anyway, would have Malcolm and Trip. Of the two, though, this is a massive episode for Reed. I would say it's probably Dom Keating's finest hour on the show. The episode does a great job of fleshing out his character, this neurotic, duty-bound officer who has spent so much time dedicated to his duty that he just hasn't really lived at all. And it's kind of sad, actually. And this all culminates in this quietly powerful moment at the end of the episode where Reed confides in Trip and tells him that the crew of the Enterprise is the first time he's ever felt comfortable and open and free to be himself. It's a really nice, quiet moment, and it does so much for the character, and you really want him to survive. You know he's going to survive because it's Enterprise, but you really want him to survive, and you're so pleased when he does. The episode does a good job of exploring how two people might experience the same thing in different ways. The two bicker pretty much constantly like an old married couple, and through these moments we get key themes coming through. Ideas of hope versus fear, reality versus faith, and positive versus negative, and in a way that makes the episode feel incredibly real and genuine. The thoughts and feelings of the characters jump all over the place and alternate. Reed goes from being incredibly cynical to hopeful, to the point of being blindly optimistic, while Trip goes from steely determination to hopeless resignation. It feels like the kind of thing that a normal person would go through in any hopeless situation. The episode is just littered with some of the funniest gallows humour. It's the stuff that you just know that you shouldn't be laughing at, but you can't help it. Trip, as he's trying to sacrifice himself to give Reed more air, and Reed is pointing his phase pistol at him, and Trip turns around and goes, "Friends don't shoot each other!" The way it's able to switch between grim survival and that's actually a really funny line, that's hard to do, and this episode does it really well. To Paul, she's got an awfully nice bum. Another thing I really like about this episode is the way it makes us feel the vastness and the emptiness and the massive desolation that is space, in a way Star Trek has never really done before or since. A lot of the early episode is Malcolm and Trip trying to just come to terms with just how massive space is and how unlikely it is that they're going to be rescued before their oxygen runs out. Now, in the era of TNG, this wouldn't be a problem because shuttles have warp speed. This episode would be a minute long. And I think that's an aspect of this episode that's rarely talked about, helping to underline how much of a prequel Enterprise really is. If your ship blows up and you're on a shuttle, you're fucked. When we watch Star Trek, we rarely think about just how massive space is, right? It's kind of comical, actually, just how little the writers really care about the distances in space. Well, not this episode. This episode is all about that. Helping to enhance the isolation and sheer tedium of being trapped alone in space are the episode's early scenes, which feel like they're intentionally unedited. We get a lot of shoe leather. A really good example of this is the scene where Trip and Malcolm are cooking dinner. What would you like? What have you got? We've got this. I'll have that. Let me put it in the Star Trek space microwave. There we go. There's your food. Thank you for my food. I'm going to eat my food now. Oh shit, we've got a microfracture in the hull. Let's use the mashed potato to close it up. This isn't usually something that you would get, but because we're trapped and we can't escape, much like the protagonists, this is a very effective scene. Very claustrophobic, very tedious, very good. And what about that resolution, eh? Dumping and igniting the fuel in the slim hopes that the Enterprise might see that and come to the rescue? That's quite similar to what we saw Spock do in the classic original series episode, The Galileo 7. Maybe he got that from this being a prequel and all. I don't think there's anything bad in this episode. There are just little niggles, little nitpicks that I have, little things that aren't perfect, and little questions that this episode brings up that keep me up at night. You would think that Trip, being the chief engineer of the Enterprise, being so intimately familiar with his ship as we know most chief engineers are, don't you find it a little bit strange that he saw one small part of the Enterprise and more crumpled up debris and just immediately arrived at the conclusion that all of that was the Enterprise? We would find out later in the episode that the visible part of the ship that was damaged was just this tiny part of the Enterprise's shuttle bay doors. Surely Trip, being aware of the schematics and being aware of just what the hull lattice would be, he would look at that and go, that doesn't look like the whole configuration of the ship. It doesn't look like the Enterprise. And why didn't the Enterprise contact the shuttle after the incident to let them know what was going on? I mean, it could have saved an awful lot of stress, but then at the same time, we wouldn't have this episode. So So I'm glad they didn't. The episode's sci-fi concepts, the micro-singularities that are responsible for the damage to the Enterprise in the first place. Interesting idea, not particularly explored, and is mostly a bit of an afterthought as just being this way to propel the story forward. I'm okay with that because the rest of this episode was good, but there was something here which could have been explored in a later episode, and to my knowledge, has not been. And here's my biggest gripe with the episode. I think it was a mistake to show the Enterprise intact and in one piece so early in the episode. If it were me making the episode, I wouldn't have any scenes on the Enterprise. I would want to strand the viewer with Trip and Malcolm, trapping them in that hopelessness. Only at the end, giving them the pops and the crackles of the garbled message, which we then realise is Hoshi and the Enterprise. Now I understand why these scenes are included. The show needed a way to explain why Malcolm and Trip thought the Enterprise had been destroyed in the first place. But yeah, I think it was a mistake. I do feel that their absence would have only intensified these feelings of loneliness and isolation and despair and impending death that the characters go through even more. Despite its flaws, I love Shuttlepod 1. I think its strengths massively outweigh its flaws. It's a strong and stripped back episode that gives much needed definition to two of the show's major characters. It balances its drama and its lighter moments very well, loads of memorable moments. And yes, it also takes the time to explore the key, the crucial, the burning question that we have had since the start of this show. Does T'Pol have a nice bum? But what did you think of this episode? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this coming soon. Next to my head is another video that you might like, so go check that out. And until next time, I'm the TrekLad. Live long and prosper.